Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mignot, CEO of the experience agency D-Flash. Each week, we get to bring on really amazing people who are doing fantastic work in business and changing the game. And this week is no different. I'm super excited to have Cary Lawrence, co-founder and general manager of audience intelligence platform at Social Code, who's going to tell us how they've had incredible staying power in this incredible industry of managing the APIs of some of the best platforms in the industry. So from Facebook to Snapchat, Instagram, they've done incredible work and have stood the test of time. So it's going to be a great conversation. And we're looking forward to you having a great listen.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. So, Cary, every time I have someone on the show, it's pretty easy when you first get started because I ask the exact same question every single time. And it's always fascinating to me to see where folks are today based on the answer to this question. So, Cary, what was your first job?
Oh, great question. So it's probably important context to know that I grew up in a tourist town, Virginia Beach, Virginia. So lots of jobs kind of working in restaurants and hotels on the ocean front in that area. But also my very, very first job was working at this country club in the grill room. So what was interesting about it is in my job there, we served the snack bar, not only for the people at the pool, but also the golfers who were kind of in the middle of the turn. If you're a golfer, I am not. But so between after the ninth hole, they kind of stop in and then they, grab something to eat and continue on. And I think probably two of the best things I learned in that very first job. So I was 15. One of them was I figured out how to get my own dang self to the office by riding my bike. And that was the first time that I started drinking coffee, which remains a very important part of my life today. So I do credit my first job with my current love of coffee. The second thing was really learning how to kind of wear different hats to serve or, communicate with different types of people. So obviously like talking to children and pool moms is a very different type of customer than talking to kind of businessmen, golfer types who are, in a rush needing to kind of continue their play. So I think those are two great things that I learned on that job.
Awesome. And I bet dealing with all different types of people has served you quite well in your entire career.
Oh, for sure. I think one of the most important skills that anyone can have is to be able to relate to all different types of people. So you want to make sure that, the junior members of your team feel comfortable approaching you and, kind of open door policy, and you can, provide that kind of trusted environment with those folks, but you also need to be able to talk to CEOs, CMOs of all the kind of largest corporations in the world. So I think being able to have some of that range and learning how to really listen to that person you're talking to and tailor the conversation accordingly is so important.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me that all the aspects of what make up my awesome guests who come on the show today are literally honed when they have their first job. It's like, you're like, well, I have to get a job, so I'll have to ride my bikes. I'm going to figure it out on my own. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this and jump right in. And those are the amazing tactics that you need when you become a business leader who's, doing the work and kicking butt and taking names. So, my analogy still runs through from every single guest I've had on the show, 40 odd guests later. So, obviously, you're not riding your bike in Virginia Beach anymore. So, tell us what you do now.
Well, I'm still sort of commuting via planes, trains, and automobiles any way possible. I'm married with two small children, Spencer and Nash, who are 4 and 2. So I will take them on the city bus with me to school, drop them off, and then I'll usually walk partway to a metro and then metro into the office and kind of go from there. So still a lot of commuting takes place. But now, as you mentioned at the top of the podcast, I'm the general manager of our software line of business here at Social Code. So our audience intelligence platform, which has been really great and exciting for me because I think as someone who had more roots in both kind of the agency world, the publishing world, and doing a lot of the kind of service-oriented things, it's been really fun for me to kind of lean into more of the product and technology side of the house and think about kind of scaling that business.
Awesome. And how do you even get there? Like, what's the Cary story?
I think my best piece of advice, I have to say, I've sort of stolen this from someone who I really admire and respect a lot, Anne Mulcahy, who is a former CEO of Xerox. She's just an incredible woman. If you've never heard her talk, you should definitely try to listen or hear her at some point. But she was really responsible for helping to kind of re-envision and bring Xerox back from the brink, from their heyday of printing paper onwards. Anyway, without getting too far down that path, she talks once about this concept of horizontal learning, which I think I've really embraced in my career, and it's served me well. So to talk a little bit more about what that means, I think a lot of times, especially in today's day and age where everyone's kind of moving and jumping between companies very quickly, and they're thinking about, what is the career lattice? What is kind of that next step? How do I get the next title? The path that she sort of mentioned that was the most useful for her in her career was again, as I said, horizontal learning. So in other words, learn how to do the accounting side, learn how to do the client service side, learn how to do the sales side, learn about operations. And I think she said that was what best equipped her to kind of be CEO. And I think my career has been a lot like that as well. And, from the, working at the country club to where I am today, there have been, a couple other jobs along the way too. I worked at an ad agency for 6 years in Boston. I worked at a think tank here in DC. I worked for Washington Post Digital. And so I've had sort of a mix of different experiences, but where I've learned the most really has been these last 9 or so years at Social Code, doing all different things. So I'm sure it won't be a surprise as a co-founder, you start off and, we were literally 3 women who started the company, very, small and nimble, just kind of had, Laura, our CEO had kind of this great idea that we wanted to kind of be that partner who could help marketers to, do advertising and analytics on social platforms at the day. But, as I said, there weren't that many of us. So where I started was really running kind of account management, which was more of my background. But at the time, we didn't have a finance team. So I was a business major. So they said, Cary, you should do all of our accounting. And I said,
you can do math. Go ahead.
Right. So that wasn't my favorite job that I've had at the company, but, it was something that needed to be done. And so I did it. And to this day, now that I manage my own P&L, I understand a lot about all the intricacies of kind of running that business. I also, at one point, managed all of our agency partnership relationships. That's where I sort of discovered that, I actually really like, the conversations that we were having with agencies back in the day was about licensing some of our technology. And that's where I sort of developed this love of the idea of building products and software and having something outside of just kind of a managed service offering that we could offer to customers. So I learned a lot about that. And then my current job, with our audience intelligence platform, we're dealing with a ton of data. We're doing, first party data, second party data, third party data. And, at the time I didn't know, I wasn't the most knowledgeable person in the room about that, but I always had that intellectual curiosity and that drive to kind of learn more and more. And I think that as I've learned more and more at the company, I've just become a little bit more well-rounded in the things that I'm able to do. So that's been exciting. I would say the evolution of Social Code, as you said that there's, we've had great staying power, which is so true. I think that so much has changed along the way, and that, as you mentioned, of course, we help marketers advertise on those big, well-known social platforms, but even more so today, it's digital platforms. We've got Amazon and Google that are in the mix. So it's really, the big 3, Facebook, Amazon, and Google are the big 3 that we're focused on. And we do tend to kind of work more directly with marketers versus agencies. But anyway, so I guess that's the best advice I would have is just learn as much as you can in different aspects of your job.
It's awesome because I think, oftentimes, especially when folks are trying to figure out what they first want to do, they're like, oh, I have to be this person X in order to be this awesome at this job. And that's just not the case anymore. It's, the more Swiss Army knife you can be, and the more flexible you can be, the better off you're going to be, because especially when you're in a company that's small and growing and dynamic, everyone's going to jump in and, wear a million and one different hats and be flexible for that kind of stuff in order to succeed. So it's awesome that you you ladies were able to do that. So let's talk a little bit more about this, because as I was saying to you earlier, that in the land of digital software platforms and working with the big threes, you all stand out for two really important reasons. One, you're a technology company run by women. And two, you've lasted a whole lot longer and successfully than a lot of your counterparts. How have you done that?
Yeah, I mean, as I was starting to get into a little bit of this earlier, but I think part of that goes back to, what I mentioned at that first job, which is really listening to our customers and brands and understanding, what was going on in the marketplace and in the ecosystem. And, with AIP, the Name for Audience Intelligence platform, we were already starting to really, realize that customer data was super important and probably the most valuable marketing asset a marketer or brand can have. And so thinking about really smart ways to help them manage not only their first party data, but to use third party data from different data providers in an interesting way, and to do this all kind of safely and securely. And we were starting to hear rumblings of this even, in the marketplace and in the ecosystem. We were fortunate to have a lot of great talent here too at Social Code that, sort of my boss who sort of had the big idea before, but, we were starting to build something that was a large investment, both with time and money, but that we felt was going to be really important to marketers. And then all of a sudden, you start to see, you hear more and more stories in the news about data breaches at these various companies, or you hear about, understanding with Facebook's big news with the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the need to, and their kind of move to remove some of that third-party data access from their platform and shift kind of that consent management function over to the marketer themselves. So we were able to anticipate some of this coming and be prepared so that when, everything sort of came to kind of to that big pivot point where people needed to figure out what was next, we were prepared. We had a solution that could help marketers both, handle their most precious marketing asset, but do it in a way that was really safe and secure too. So I guess long story short, listen to your customers, be aware of what's happening in the industry, get out and talk to different people from all different companies.
That's incredible. And for you, how did you deal with your clients when, I'm sure not every one of your clients was like, oh, awesome, great, let's go ahead and do this. Because in a way you're almost trying to be a fortune teller, like predicting where you're supposed to go as opposed to where they are right now.
Yeah.
And how did you sort of figure out ways to convince your clients and counsel them that look, the puck is actually going over here. And so we have to be prepared.
Right. No, that's a great point, and something that I should be very transparent about, which is you're not always going to hit it out of the park, and you're going to not always find that perfect product to market fit. And we certainly didn't have it nailed when we first went out to market with AIP. We were thinking, oh, well, Social Code traditionally works with all these big Fortune 500 enterprise clients. These guys seem like the logical low-hanging fruit that we should start talking to about licensing our platform. And what happened almost organically was we saw that our kind of growth division that was working more with these digital disruptors and more of the mid-market brands, this AIP was becoming a central part of all of those conversations. And so long story short, we realized that we were basically able to fit a need for an underserved market. And by changing our focus on, okay, let's say from now on, it's these mid-marketers, these disruptors who this is most relevant for. And we can do this at a more accessible price point. We also came out of the gate with pricing was kind of all over the place. And it was a lot of kind of, again, listening and adjusting. And, and I should say that as long as I've been here at Social Code, I've probably worked on 3 or 4 failed, technology initiatives. And so this is AIP is probably one of the first ones from a technology standpoint. I mean, our managed service business has always been very strong, but where we've really seemed to have found that good product to market fit. So to your point, it's not just, we've of course had clients who question who are you and why are you sort of justified to be offering this, or why should we work with you instead of a LiRamp or a DMP or, what have you, and sort of navigating those conversations and starting to just kind of get in market and see who are you able to kind of really fit a need for and solve for. So that's what we've been able to do, but it wasn't like a slam dunk from the start. It was a process.
Well, I think the transparency is awesome, because I think that's also a thing that, especially with business leaders today, saying like, no, obviously this was trial and error. Like, we didn't come up with the software you see right now in this beautiful package is not what we had a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago. But we had clients who believed in what we were trying to do, and took a chance. And I think that level of transparency is necessary, because as more and more of these platforms show up, and then it's a boom and a blast. Like, there's a lot of great news about them, and then you hear them just fade away. And probably one of the reasons why you guys have been able to be successful is that you stayed the course. Do you all think that because you're not based in New York, as it were, that you had a bit of an advantage in terms of dealing with your clients? Because, as I said, as a New Yorker, I knew every one of your competitors.
Well, it is interesting. So the reason our client-facing presences are really centralized in New York and LA right now. With that said, the reason we started within Washington, D.C. is we were actually incubated within the Washington Post company initially. Wow. So Social Code is wholly owned by Graham Holdings, formerly the Washington Post company. So that's kind of where we had our start, and why so many of the executive team is still kind of based here in DC. So I would say, today, DC, our office is a lot of product engineering, HR, finance, executive. It's several different departments, but most of our client-facing teams are based at and really kind of centralized within New York and LA. And then we recently acquired an Amazon agency about a year ago that's based out of Cleveland. So that's a very kind of a growing presence. And then we have some teams in Austin and San Francisco, a large kind of product engineering focus there. But I guess the short answer to your question is we very quickly did learn that we needed to build out those teams outside of DC in those more like client-facing markets like New York and LA. So we did that, and now we're pretty distributed across a couple different offices. But I've certainly been happy to be able to kind of stay here in DC, which is closer to my family.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I feel like, as I said, in New York, there's so many companies, there's so many different things happening. Then when you can always tell when folks companies are originated in New York versus when they're originated somewhere else. Like, the vibe is different, how they approach things, and the teams that they build in New York and LA or in San Francisco are always different if they are building from outside versus if they were born and bred. So I think there's definitely something to be said about like the seriousness of the way that you all have taken your business, and coming out of the Washington Post is, again, it's like, it's grown-ups doing this. It's not young folks who are just hoping that something will be awesome and then making it happen. So along the way, you've obviously had tons and tons of ups and downs and challenges along the way. What's been would you say your biggest challenge, and how have you overcome it?
Sure. I think for myself, I would say the headline there would be learning how to not take things so personally. And to provide a little more context in that answer, I think, when you tend to be someone who's a driven, ambitious person who wants to kind of work hard and succeed, and you can put a lot of stock in the thing that you're working on, or the part of the business that you're owning. And I think that, as I mentioned before, there were a couple of initiatives within Social Code that were failures and that didn't necessarily have this great product market fit. And the first time or so, I took it very personally that, like, when we were making kind of the mature decision to kind of sunset that initiative, I felt like it was a personal affront to me and what I was focused on. And the more that I learned to like kind of think outside of myself a little bit and not to take it, I learned that it wasn't a personal attack on me or my contributions. And there must be a reason why I continued to be given these opportunities to work on, newer, bigger, cooler things. And, as I said, eventually we found this great fit. But so that was certainly a lesson for me, which was like, don't think that just because this one initiative didn't quite nail it, that it was necessarily, a personal reflection on you. So that has definitely, I think, been one of my biggest challenges. I think a couple things that I've learned along the way that I wish I'd known when I was younger are thinking about trying to align yourself with the primary direction or focus of your company. I think is super important. Like, because what you don't want to do, or I should say, to even extend that even further, that analogy, the direction of where the market is going. Because what you don't want to do is kind of end up running a successful business. And I can give you a personal example here. As I mentioned, I've had so many different roles and I don't regret a lot of them, but at one point I was managing all of our kind of global agency partnerships and those relationships, which was great. We needed to do that at the time. But then I started to see that as our company evolved to be focused more on selling direct to marketers and brands versus the agencies directly, I found that I was sort of a little bit on an island. So I was quickly able to kind of recenter myself in the primary direction of the company. And I think that's a piece of advice that I would give to younger folks. That's not always obvious. I think I would also give it, thinking about, family and friends who find themselves working in different careers where it's, a career that's not necessarily on a positive trajectory. Like, think about how you can kind of put yourself on that positive path. The other big thing is change. And, this is related to us talking about our staying power, but change is inevitable. It happens all the time. And it's almost always pretty hard at first, but I try to tell all the younger folks at Social Code to just embrace it. And if you kind of just keep your head down, work hard, try to be open to new ideas, then it usually works itself out. But that was hard for me to also, handle as a younger Cary, which is like, oh, there's this huge crazy thing. Oh, this is going to be terrible. The sky is falling. So those are kind of some areas that I think things I've learned along the way.
Well, that's the thing that's the kind of things I always like to hear on the show, because it's so refreshingly honest for us to actually say this stuff. Because again, the veneer is it's sunshine, lollipops wherever you go, and there's and change never happens. Everything's awesome, and you're always killing it. You're always crushing it, and we all know that that's just not the case. And I think it's really interesting that in the last few years, especially in business, we've seen this shift where it's now more about being empathetic and human and saying I want to make this change, or how do I get there? What's my way of understanding that this is a change for now that will help me put me on this path, and it may not be feeling awesome right this second, but if I stay with it, I can get where I need to go. And I think it's definitely a change, and especially in our industry in the last few years, where there's been a lot more openness to people actually talking about that versus, everything's perfect and nothing's never going to change.
Yeah, exactly. It's everything's a journey.
And it's gonna be fine. You just have to you just kind of have to roll with it. So would you guys say that and when you're approaching brands and saying, okay, listen, this is the thing that we're going to do, this is how we're going to approach it, okay, we're now in 2019 thinking about 2020 and beyond, are you seeing more and more of your clients far more open than they were, say, 2 or 3 years ago? Or is it more about coming up with new and interesting products that can challenge them and help them see a better thing along their bottom line, especially now that you work with not just the big three, but obviously all the social platforms and how they've all changed drastically in the last 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking about, we're having those conversations with brands, there's so much change that's happening, and a couple sort of trends that I sort of notice. One obviously is with everything going on sort of the consumer drive towards privacy, having more private engagements, some of the sort of negative externalities that are created from being on social media or social platforms. I think that, the consumers are holding brands more accountable for maintaining, their privacy, delivering experiences that are personalized for them, which is a little bit of an, that's sometimes those can run counter to one another. And so I think to answer your question directly, I think brands are very open to hearing about new ideas or new ways to kind of solve problems. With that said, I think there's also a big trend, and I see this obviously a ton with kind of that mid-market size advertiser, but to take more of that control in-house. So they know that they're already having to control some of that, as I say, like consent management. In other words, like, how did you obtain this data? Did you get the proper, was it obtained ethically? Do your customers know that you're using their data X, Y, and Z way? Are you, and I think that there's a value exchange that happens there. I think it's a little bit of what sometimes we'll talk about as like a privacy paradox, where if brands are delivering value to their customers, then they're willing to, hand over that information. So if they're getting more personalized experiences, they're getting better deals, better loyalty programs, then absolutely that's a fair exchange. I think that's the area that brands are still sort of navigating, which is how can I make sure that I'm able to market effectively and leverage this most valuable customer or marketing asset with the customer data, but do it in a way that's providing value and better experiences for my customers.
So it's interesting, like digging in a little bit more. Do you see that it's a shift in age in terms of data they're willing to give up? That it seems as though, and I see this in our own business, that it's not. It's more like Gen Z because technically I'm a millennial because I was born in the '80s. So
you aged me.
It's like you're basic, and you're a Zennial. So like trust me, you're a Zennial, because like that there's that weird late '70s, early '80s. That like box doesn't fit because we're all kind of weird in terms of like we went to school with the internet, but cell phones weren't as fast and cool as they are now. Mm-hmm. So, but very much so that this younger generations, let's say like Gen Z, are far more about the experiences. And because of the experiences, yes, you can have more of my data versus Gen Xers who are like, now deeply holding on to like all this information. And just from our own, edification from the work that we're doing, are you seeing that similar shift as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. And I think you're absolutely right that there is the millennials and the younger consumers do want kind of exchange in the form of experiences and more tailored, curated experiences. They don't want a lot of noise and they don't want just flashing advertisements in their face. I think I do think that the privacy piece, though, is pretty universal. I think that I guess the question is also like I think about my children or even like, children, young people who are not quite in the workforce. Do they understand all the actions that they're kind of taking today and how that might be like leveraged or used down the line? And I'm not sure how much awareness there is, but I generally think that the desire for people's personal information to be guarded and protected, it cuts across all, but to your point, the younger generations definitely want better experiences in exchange.
Yeah, I think of all the things that happened with Cambridge Analytica, and every time I hear another Experian data breach, I'm like horrified, and it also seems like how our industry has changed so much in terms of like it used to just be okay, I'm gonna give my email and I'll be able to get this free thing, mm-hmm. And now it's like I give my email and it's also I've now linked into. I've OAuth into Facebook, so now you know everything about me, where I live, all my friends, friends, and can now do all sorts of things in terms of my data. And do you think that, I know with GDPR in Europe, like, do you think there's going to be any kind of backlash against this now, or it's going to, will there be a GDPR equivalent that actually happens here in the US? Do you think?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. Already with the, California Consumer Privacy Act, that's a similar version of the GDPR that's rolling out and will be enforced beginning January 2020. So even like Facebook and other platforms are also kind of pushing some of that, the onus of the consent management and liability onto the marketers to make sure that, they're not the only ones on the hook for managing that data properly. But I think that you're going to start to see a lot of changes because customers and governments, frankly, are demanding it. And I think that's probably a good thing. I think there will be equilibrium. And I still stand by the fact that you can still manage someone's data in a very kind of secure, ethical way and provide those great tailored experiences. But it just means like you can't skip any of those steps, making sure that you're treating this like the most valuable asset that it is.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really important point that I don't think a lot of folks talk about, like at least skipping the steps. You know, like way back when I first started in advertising, one of the first projects I worked on was pfgoldfish.com, which was the very first website that kind of like a social network for little kids. Mm-hmm. And it was all about gaming, and basically it was like supposed to be for like ages 7 and up. And because it was Pepperidge Farm goldfish, and you sort of amorphized into little like cartoon characters. And I remember that the level of detail and the amount of legal hoops we had to fly through repeatedly on a daily basis building this one website was incredible. And that's going back now 12 years. That's pre-Facebook. But you know, the clients, the PF Goldfish, the agency that I worked for at the time, and our lawyers on both sides were like, we cannot get this wrong because we're dealing with the data of little kids and their families. And it was so important, and it was like the level of trust. I mean, like there were certain things that I couldn't even see. Like, you know, even though I was producing the website with the development team, like they were so regimented about that. And it seems that along the way, when like, you know, the excitement of having social networks for everybody kind of came out, that level of like very detailed, extreme focus on making sure that we don't miss a skip kind of went out the window. And I see now it seems like there's now a pullback for that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And it's going to be, you know, obviously children are sort of a protected class. And of course there's extra precautions there. But to your point, I think it's going to extend out further across everyone's data is going to need to be handled with kid gloves.
Yeah, it's interesting and like super fascinating. Like I said, like, you know, as an agency that, you know, builds experiences that are physical, where you actually go to the thing that we build, you know, we're always in the same boat because like, okay, like you signed in to come to this thing that we're building. All right, great, thanks for your data, and now come have this free cocktail. But also we're getting lots of data from you, so you don't even realize it. So it's definitely changing, you know, even how we approach and the things that we build for our clients as well. So I think, you know, as long as we get a little bit closer to like that old school way of like, okay, every single step here, let's not skip a beat. We're all going to be better off. So fun question now.
Okay.
So I love DC. I was just there about a month and a half ago at the German embassy doing an event because that's what I do. And we had zero time to go for drinks or cocktails. So I know you're a busy working mom, but where's your place to go when you want to like have a drink or grab a coffee, get out of the office and just have some Cary time?
Oh, I love that. So this is actually coming on good timing because I had a spa day with two of my girlfriends yesterday who both are also, you know, women getting it done. They actually started off as two clients of mine years ago, and we've sort of evolved into being close friends. But we went to the Mandarin Oriental, I think has the best spa here in DC.
Oh.
And we had, of course, some glasses of rosé and prosecco afterwards because that's
as one does.
As one does. The other cool thing, if you haven't been to DC recently, is they've totally redone the whole Southwest kind of wharf waterfront area. So it's now kind of called the Wharf. There's there's a new concert venue, the Anthem. There's a ton of restaurants. There's a great new cocktail bar that I went to called 12 Stories recently, where you literally kind of go up this elevator, 12 floors, and you're looking out on the water, and you have these little tables right outside, which are great. So that was pretty fun. But as you said too, I am kind of a mom in the thick of it with little ones, so I'm not quite as cool and hip as maybe I wish I was. But those are a couple places that I have thoroughly enjoyed recently.
Awesome. So I'm with you on the Mandarin Oriental. That still goes down as my all-time favorite hotel stay.
Oh, awesome.
Like 10 years ago for a business trip, I had to be there for a week for a work project. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
It was so terrible. Oh my gosh. I don't think I've ever eaten that much sushi that was disturbingly expensive in my entire life. Expense account before I had the company, obviously. But yeah, I just remember being like, how am I in this hotel? I added the suite. I got a giant jacuzzi, the marble, and I'm like, what?
So nice. Yeah. So
But I started asking this question earlier this year with some of my guests, because it's not just about the fact that it's cool to have a chat about where Laura can go get a next cocktail whenever I travel, which is always important. But I think it's also really important for our listeners to understand that, like, we're still all human, and that we do need that moment of zen and, get away and like have some me time, because the more we do that, the more productive and the better off we're going to be as leaders. And so it's always really nice, and it's always fascinating to hear where people go. Usually it does involve wine. No one ever goes, I go for a run. Like, no one says that.
I'm sure someone does that, but unfortunately it's not me.
Literally, don't trust me. And I've now done 25 of these this year. No one has said a run.
That's funny.
But yeah, I just think it's just refreshing and great to hear, because like I said, when you're busy doing the damn thing, taking some time out for yourself is often something that gets missed by the wayside. So it's great to hear that you are able to take a little bit of time for Cary, and
sure.
And continue to kick ass and take names. But Cary, it has been a delight having you on the show. I could keep talking about privacy for hours. It's something that it's always, and something that we're talking here at the company. So thank you so very much for this conversation. We'll be sure to put all the show notes in about Social Code, and to follow and hear and read about what you guys are up to, and learn more about you. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Laura. And I can't wait to come to one of your next events and have a cocktail there and meet you in person.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Have a good one.
You too. So you guys hit stop.